Our guest for today's episode is Shreya Shankar. She has graduated from Duke University in Mechanical Engineering and Visual Arts. She is working as a product designer at Uber San Francisco and has previously interned at Fractal Ink Design Studio, Mumbai. I am Mayank Khandelwal and you are listening to Whiteboard.fm. Hey Shreya, how's it going?
It's going well. What about you?
Good, good. So Shreya, how did you get started in design?
I actually found design very accidentally. I originally went to college for architecture, and I wanted to do architecture since I was 8, so that was what I had gone for. I realized that the architecture at my school, the program for civil engineering, was very environmental focused and not what I actually wanted to do. And I also was really big into art when I was in school, so I wanted to do that in college in some way. And so I saw this conference that was going on in my school, and it was called the intersection of art and technology, and it sounded pretty interesting. That I had no idea what it was, so I thought I'd go check it out. And that was the first time that I'd ever been introduced to like the words user experience or anything. But like since then, it kind of really stuck with me. I loved it, and yeah, that's really where it started. I got introduced to a bunch of designers. I was lucky in that like the conference had a lot of designers come and speak, so they shared their experiences and they shared their portfolios and everything. And so um, I was able to see like what their jobs were, and they were from like a very wide variety of companies. So that's kind of how I got started, and I tried to like figure my way out from there. But I didn't come from a traditional design background at all.
Nice. So, what was the first project like?
Uh, Actually, when I opened my portfolio now, because I knew I was gonna have to share it, I went and I looked at my first project after a really long time, and it's it's very very like it's very
Yeah.
young, and it's there's so many things I would do differently, but it was it was really fun doing it. I remember having a lot of fun. But at that time, I really didn't know what design was. Like I was literally maybe like a month into my like design education or educating myself. And so I kind of had to figure out a lot of things on my own. So I ended up looking at a lot of other designers' portfolios and tried to like copy how they did their case studies and how they um, explain their work and explain their choices. But obviously, like there were a lot of things that I did now that I look at it and I realize like, oh, like this is not proper standard, like design standards, or this is not how like it would be feasible to engineer. Like I realize more now, but at that time it was more like fun, and it was more just about exploring the area and coming to understand what really made design.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that was my very first project. I mean, I was really proud of it at the end of it,
What was
but
the
it
project
was
again?
so we actually, from this design conference, there was a challenge that was given to us. And the challenge was to create an app that connects families across the globe.
Okay.
And so they kind of left it up to us to like define what connect means, and kind of figure out what the real problem was for that families would have. So we all like brainstormed it together, but we didn't have time to actually design it. So I decided to finish it and like carry it on and finish it as my first project. And it was good. It was like a good way to start, like thinking about a project, and kind of like the a first like step into design. So yeah, that was my very first.
Hey, that's nice.
Yeah.
So, what made you apply to fractal design?
So I think sophomore year, I realized that I really wanted to be a designer. I wanted to kind of, I spent my summer after my first year of college, like making a portfolio for myself and creating more side projects, and tried to like do as many things that I could to get my skills up and learn all of the tools that I needed. And at that point, I knew that this is something that I really, really was interested in and could see myself doing. And so I wanted to try out working at some kind of design studio or like design company, and I realized that at least in the US it's very hard to, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg problem where like it's hard to get experience without having any experience. And so um I tried looking for positions here and like realized that it was going to be quite hard here because I was competing with people from like proper design schools and who had like much more training than I did. And so then I just started applying elsewhere. Like I think a lot of it is reaching out to people, and just even if they're not in design, just reaching out to people
Right.
who work at certain companies or know of people who are at other companies and see where that leads you, because you never know like what door is going to open with who you talk to. And I've also realized through all of this recruiting and everything that every person I've had a conversation with, I've learned something from them. Like even if it's not just about design, just in general, I've taken away something from the conversation. So I would really encourage people to just get on the phone with as many people as possible and kind of just like keep track of who you talk to, because they'll always be like useful in the future somehow. Like you always want to connect back with them. And so I had a friend who was like working on a startup in India and in Bombay, and she got her design done from Fractal, and she was like, oh, like I don't have any design work for you, but this is the agency that did our design work, so maybe you can talk to them. So I talked to them. I showed them a couple of there was some interest there. They're very small. They're like, it's like it was a 60-person design company. It's a bit bigger now, but it was quite small back then. And so they saw a couple of my designs. It was quite an informal interview process. It was more just like, do you have like, do you have the passion? Do you like, do we see you fitting in? And like, they asked me a couple of questions, and then that was it. And I'm very thankful that that worked out, because it set the groundwork for so much of my future design work from
Yeah.
then and my job now. And so I learned a lot from them. I would highly recommend people to check them out. They do some really great work. And I still think what the project that I was on that summer was maybe one of my favorite projects still so far. Um, and it was cool because I also got to learn the difference between working for an agency and working for a company, which is something that I didn't even know was a difference like at the beginning. And then I realized at the end that there's so many differences working for a design agency versus working for one company, where you have so many more levels of like bureaucracy and like different processes to get through, versus an agency faces different struggles where you're talking to a client and you're trying to like work on what they need and also put in your own creativity, but you have to somehow meet in the middle, or at least like somehow make the client think that you're doing what they want you to do.
Right.
And so you learn a lot of not even just like hard design skills, but I learned a lot of uh, kind of more like people management skills, or understanding how to manage expectations. um, and yeah, it was great. It was great. But definitely like talk to people, reach out to people from your school or college, alumni, whoever is in your network. Just somehow message them and see if they will get on a call with you, and usually they're pretty helpful.
Awesome. So a couple of follow-up questions. Are there any more learnings that you've had in terms of the differences between a design company and a design agency?
Yeah, I think definitely one of them is, I think, if at an agency, one of the things I liked the most was that even though I was staffed on one specific project, I got to still help out with what other people were doing on different projects. Like I could still help them on the side when I had a bit more free time, or if they needed something. So you get to see projects in very different areas or very different fields. So like it could be anywhere from like, I worked on a project for Maruti, so like it could be anywhere from that to like something for a bank or like something for TV. You never know what's going to come your way, and so it's really, it keeps the job interesting because you always are working on something new and something different. With a bigger company, it's a lot slower and the work is a lot more. A lot of bigger companies kind of like stick to a very rigid design process, and you have to be very lucky to find a team that allows you to figure out your own design process while fitting into the company's bigger way of doing things. And so that's one of the biggest differences is bigger companies kind of move slower, and you work on more micro things for a longer period of time. Whereas when you're working at an agency, you kind of get to work on a larger project within a smaller time frame. It's like it, but I will say that as much as that is true, my team right now is not like that. There are still certain expectations that we have to follow, just like certain processes, but in terms of like moving fast, my team still moves pretty fast, and we design quite quickly. But you still have to face like you have to face the challenge of, are you designing something for the user, or are you designing something to help the business, or are you designing something like, what are you designing for? And you have to try and make all those needs connect. And so you have to make sure that if the ask is coming from like the business people, then you have to design for making more money. And if the ask is coming from like your head of diversity, then you have to design for like inclusivity. And so there's all different people that can ask you things for like different goals of the business, which is less, I find, in a design agency, because they come to you with one specific problem, and that's the problem that you're trying to solve.
Right. That's great.
Yeah.
Also, you said your project at Fractal Design, that is the Maruti Suzuki project, was one of your favorite projects. Can you explain about
Yeah.
that more in detail?
So the project that I worked on was basically, it was like a giant project. We basically had to redesign all of Maruthi's website and their interface screens within their showrooms. And so it was quite exciting, because it was something that was going to be seen by a very large population of
Yeah.
people. And the fact that Maruti is one of the biggest car manufacturers in India, was also another exciting part of it. And so this is one of my maybe second or third case studies. So it's still like very juvenile, but I'll share it anyway, because I think it's important for people to see. But so this was what it looked like at the before, and then this is kind of, I did like a before and after, so this is kind of like what it looks like after we redesigned it. And so there was some research that was done at design agencies. You also don't do the research. The art is like, Fractal was divided into like UX and UI, so I was more on the UI team. So like the user experience people did all the research and like talking to the clients and everything, so they came to us with like the synthesis of all the information, and so we kind of use that to inform our designs. And so we like, they created a deck for us, so clearly like we did research based on like other companies, like saw what they did, and there was this huge deck that was passed around with like, oh, like what every other car company does and how their websites are successful. And so then these are like the kind of founding principles that we based our new design off of. So we realized that the current Maruti website was not consistent. It was very kind of scattered all over the place. So we redesigned all of the cars to look the same, like a family of cars to be displayed in the same way, and kind of like to make it look more energetic. And the idea behind this was to build trust on this brand. And then it was also not a very visually appealing site, so like the drop off rate was also higher, because people just like were not engaged on the website. I also learned through this that website design was one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
This is a bear of a website to do, and there were actually maybe like 6 designers working on this site. But so there were a lot of like, Maruti had a lot of stats on cars, so they had a lot of like stats on the horsepower of a car, like how the car performs year after year. And so these are all graphs and stuff that had to be translated into a way that people could understand it, and also take away the information that they needed, which was hard for them to do before this redesign, because the stats were kind of very like scatteredly presented. And then there was also not an easy way to for people to go and see the cars that they wanted to see, and so we tried to make it more of a direct way, so that they could, it was very easy for them to like book a visit and keep that front and center, because one of the asks from them was that they wanted more people to come into their showrooms to see these cars, and so that was something that we brought to the front so that they were able to do that. And then the last thing was like make it adaptable to like multiple different screens, because obviously people are going to be viewing them on like an infinite number of devices. And so we sent it off to our developers, but so Fractal also didn't have any developers, so we also sent it off to like another company of developers. And when we send it to them, we had to send them the specs for every screen size that we designed for. So that was before the time of Sketch, and it was before like Figma and everything. So this was done in Photoshop, and we had to manually resize everything to be the size of a phone and the size of an iPad and a laptop and like a bigger desktop.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of work. And now it's like you don't need to do it anymore, but
Yeah.
back then it was something that was highly considered. So this is my project. I am definitely very proud of it, because I think it was the first time I could really like take a huge project and kind of condense it into 5 main things that we were trying to work on. Because now I've realized, when I can stop my share, but now I realize like when you go into interviews and things, the first thing that people ask you is why did you do something? There's always like intentionality behind every single design, like every button, every color. There has to be some kind of intentionality behind it. And so it's really important to like bucket your thinking into not only into how something looks, but like why it looks that way.
Great. Also, Shreya, can you tell us more about your approach in designing your own portfolio? Like,
Yeah.
why have you done what have you done?
Yeah, I mean, this is the 3rd iteration of my portfolio, I think. And I actually haven't looked at it for a while, but I I kind of took my example from a lot of student portfolios, because if you want to learn, I think design students are the best to learn from in terms of how they explain their work. Because I think they're taught really well how to talk about their work and how to explain their
Right.
case studies. And so I've learned some from them. I looked at existing designer portfolios that I really liked, and tried to model it off of that. And I kind of started my first portfolio that way. I didn't build mine from scratch. I use Squarespace as a template. It's really great if you're a student. There's a student discount for Squarespace, and I highly recommend it if you don't know how to code. I don't really that much, so I didn't want to try and do it. And then over the years, I've kind of like discovered my own way of presenting my work and kind of laying out my thought process, kind of from everything that I've learned. But I've realized it's really, really important to understand and define the problem that you're solving. So I always try and do that first,
Yeah.
and also talk about why it's a real problem. If you can't get to that point at the beginning and you start going straight into like your fancy designs and showing all the visual stuff, people aren't going to understand what they're looking at or why what you did is important. So it's really, it's like very critical that when someone is looking at your portfolio, you define your problem, and then the next thing that I do is I define success. So you talk about, okay, like this is the problem, this is what the product would look like if it was successful, this is how it's going to solve this problem. And then from there you go into like research, and then after research then you go into your designs. Your designs are actually like the highest fidelity of my designs are really only the last part of my my portfolio, because I've also realized in interviews people really only care people care more about why you've designed something than what you've designed. Like if you can talk about what the people problem was, and if you can talk about how you knew it was a problem that you had to solve, that's a lot more important than showing just like the visual part of it, like holistically talking about it, and then understanding. Also then at the end I started adding in learnings, because I've realized that learnings are also really important, because people
Can you
always
show that
ask
in
you
one
like,
of the case studies? How you structured
yeah,
it?
I'm going to show it to you in the one that I did this for a school project.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably the best one that I've structured. So I made like a fitness app, and I did a lot of research before like coming to like this like the interface that I had. But basically I start with like an overview of what it is. So like you give an understanding of immediately like, okay, like the current space exists in like 2 extremes, and so this is why I created this app, because it falls short for the people that are in the middle. And so people kind of get an understanding of like what you're doing. And then I started talking about, okay, like my process, like the initial thoughts of like why I'm doing something. So like you talk about why this is a problem in the first place. And then I condensed the research a little bit. And so so I've like tried to present the research in kind of less of a text heavy way. And then you come up with your pain points, right? So like you have like the three main pain points that I gathered from all of the research that I've done. And you come up with like a hypothesis for who's going to use this. And then I came up with some personas of like, okay, like help me anchor my understanding of these are the people that I'm designing for, like the buckets of people that I'm designing for. And so after all of that, I have my problem statement. And so I learned about how might we is at a very early stage in my design career. And it's kind of come with me all the way because they're really, really good at helping you understand what the problem is. And so I have my problem statement, and then constraints that I was facing. So it's always important to define your constraints. So like why, like your barriers to success and how you can overcome them, or if you don't overcome them, how you can solve within those constraints. And so because my project like involved wearables, like obviously the constraint came from the fact that a lot of the tech isn't where I would have ideally liked it to be yet. So I'm working within a very small kind of window of availability and opportunity. And so then you talk about the solution process. And I kind of just outlined like something that I really like to do is with every project that I do is something called experience mapping. And it's a really good way to kind of lay out all of the main areas of your product, and then what the goal is of every stage of your product. So for this, for example, like I had 5 main pages or 5 key states that I wanted the user to be able to experience, and every page had its own goal, and then how you would achieve that goal and what success looked like on every page. And so that's something that really, really helps me kind of get to the idea, or like the place of mind where I can then finally see what the product is going to look like. Because when you start something, you have no idea what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
And you can always keep coming back to this. Like when you get down into design and you start working in like smaller pixels, it's easy to get lost in that and not keep a bigger understanding of like what your idea or like your main goal is. And so
Right.
you always come back to this and you're like, okay, I'm designing this page because I want someone to be more aware of how much like oxygen they're using when they're exercising. And so like once you have that understanding, then you can like go back and come back with like a fresher mind. And so I keep this with me at all times. So I think this is a really important part of the process where you define all of your goals and you make it very clear as to like what your product is exactly trying to do. And so then after that, there's just sketches, which is like pretty normal, I think. Like I try doing, sometimes when I can't think, like I try to do those like crazy eights, which are basically you time sketches and you just don't care about how good they look. You just go all out for like, I do maybe 2 and see what comes from them. And usually pretty often, like I get some good ideas that I can like at least branch off of. And so this was, and then yeah, I get to the final outcome of the project. And this is like where it looks really nice. And I explain each page and how I finally got to, you know, like the design decisions that I made. And the last part of it, as I mentioned, was takeaways from the project. And so some things that I had learned throughout talking to people, my research, and about designing a product like this in general. And so I think this is probably like the best way that I've laid something out so far. I don't know if I'll do another one, but definitely I have ways that I would like to make this better. But yeah, I have some other designer links that I've kind of like used to model this off of, but this is kind of now how I structure my design thinking in general.
That's great. That's a great approach.
Yeah.
Also, Shreya, can you tell us more about how did you apply for Uber?
Yeah. So that was after my third year, or after my before my third summer of college. That was like the summer when like everyone gets their internships, and that was like the biggest summer because it's all about like getting your full-time job and everything. And so at Duke, it's not a design school, so a lot of designers don't come, or a lot of design recruiters don't come to Duke to recruit. And so then it's really on you to reach out to your network. And so um, I reached out to a lot of people who worked at tech companies, but they worked more in the software engineering or like the PM side. And so um, I got some good leads. Like it was good to open those conversations. I think I had about like 80 or 90 phone conversations in my time of recruiting. And I kept like a spreadsheet of everyone I talked to, what company they worked at. Um, and even if they couldn't help me now, it was just nice to have their contact for later. And I know people say don't apply online because it's like kind of throwing your resume into a void, but I got almost all my interviews applying online. Um, so I think if you have a really strong portfolio and you have a good resume, um, there really isn't a reason that you won't get noticed if you apply online. So I think I applied to maybe like 60 companies online, and I didn't hear from some, but I think I heard back from about like 15 or 16 with interviews, like at least first round interviews. Um, and I would really encourage people to apply online, even if it's like discouraging that you don't hear back from them. Um, some people will get back to you. And some of the other ways like I applied was I through LinkedIn. I just like cold messaged people, even if I didn't have any connections to them. I use Twitter sometimes to like reply to people's tweets. But for Uber specifically, I applied online. And I know Uber does look at like they do look at their online database. Um, and so yeah, it went from there.
Great. Can it so how's the culture at Uber design team? How many designers are there and what are you guys working on?
So Uber has the way that Uber is divided is it's kind of divided into different sections of the company or different verticals of the company. So rides is one, driver is another. There's a design team specifically for Eats, and then there's a design team for Freight, which is our like Uber Freight is a trucking operation that we have in the U.S. Um, and so most of the designers are kind of like in a pod for that specific business vertical. Their design team as a whole like still works as a design team as like one whole kind of organization, but when it comes to what you work on, you mainly work on like you usually only work on like if you're on Eats design, you only work on that. The culture I think is I really like it. I don't know if that's because of my team, but I definitely love it. People are really open and they're really willing to help. And I every time I've had a question about like where I can find a file or like how I wanted to use one of the Rezo printers once, and people like took time out of their schedule to come help me figure it out. So as a whole, I think there's some really, really talented people at the company as well. And there's a lot that you get to learn from them just by, like being in meetings with them and listening to how they critique work and the questions that they ask. I think that's one of the things that's blown my mind is um, I'm very, very just in awe of the questions that people ask in meetings, especially or just in general when we're working on a project. Because in my head, I'm thinking, how do they know that that's the right question to ask? But it almost always is to get the answers that we need to like push this project forward. And so that's something that I'm trying to get better at now. But the fact that I can learn from people that have come from such a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences and have worked at other companies and can like bring their experiences to Uber and to our team is it's really exciting. And I really like it, especially for a young designer. It's a great place to be, I think.
Awesome. So can you tell us more about the project that you did during your internship and what you're working on currently?
Yeah. So my team is a little bit different than the teams that exist at the company. I work on Uber's incubation lab, which is basically it's a if you easily put, it's a startup within a bigger company. So what we do is basically we take on projects that other teams want to test and kind of try if it'll work as a solution. And sometimes we come up with our own ideas and we test it and prototype it in the life cycle of like 12 to 16 weeks. And then we'll test it out in a pocket of users in one certain area. And if it works, then we'll scale it out to the rest of the company or the rest of the org that it's a part of. And if it doesn't, then it's fine. It was just a trial anyway. And so I am lucky because I get to work across most of the business verticals. I'm currently working on something for Eats, but over my internship, I was working on a project for Driver. We were working on launching virtual driver support into the into like Uber's ecosystem. And so the idea was that we wanted to reduce the number of people that were physically working at every single Uber Greenlight hub, which is where drivers go to get support. And by doing so, we would save the company a lot of money because they would have to pay less people to occupy these spaces. And we replace them with like virtual kiosks basically.
Can you share that
And where
project?
drivers, yeah, it was where, so drivers can kind of like walk up to a kiosk and get their questions answered on virtual support. And so that was my internship project. Um, and so basically, let me see if I can find a picture of the kiosk. This is a very first trial of what a kiosk would look like. And the idea was that there's an iPad in front of you, and then there's the virtual screen on top. And this is a driver currently who's talking to one of our Uber support specialists. And so the thing that was really exciting about this project was that it was obviously my first project in a bigger kind of environment and in a more corporate space. And so I was able to actually understand what it meant to measure success, define success, and kind of see how your designs matched up against the success, and also test my designs out, because you never actually get to test your designs out when you're doing it in kind of more of an idealistic space. And so I was working on the check-in queue for this Greenlight hub. So the idea is that like someone comes and they walk up to the Greenlight hub, a driver checks in, they fill out all this information, and then they go sit down and they see a screen, which is like, these are like iterations, but like this is basically like what the screen looked like at the end. And when their name is called up, they when their name is called up, they go and sit at the kiosk. And so in our heads, when we did this, we thought that this would be very simple, people would understand it, everything would be great, and like project is over. We actually realized once we launched this for the first time that people were having a lot of issues understanding what this queue meant. And not only that, they were not understanding the word queue. They didn't understand what it, like, that's not a word that they used very frequently. So they just didn't get it. And since there were no numbers here, or like there was no time, they didn't know why two names were being showed. And so there were a lot of issues that we kind of had to deal with after that. But it was really exciting for me because I actually got to see some real user feedback. And so that was the coolest part. But so this is like kind of a mini project that I did during my 12 weeks at the company. And so it was a start into this entire, like, the Uber space. My team has since moved on from Driver. We did some stuff for Driver, and now I'm working on something for Eats. I can tell you a little bit about it because it's actually launched into the public in some ways.
Yeah.
But so for the Eats app, I worked on a waitlist app, which basically if anyone has used Yelp waitlist, it's kind of similar in that sense. But the idea is that because Eats already has a strong user base, it'll eventually be able to integrate into the Eats app or the Rider app, so that people can put themselves on the wait list while they're on their way to the restaurant or something like that. And so I worked on the waitlist app, which I unfortunately can't share because it's still kind of being deployed.
Yeah.
But I was doing that, and now we're working in the current time that we're in, and with everything going on, we're working on a way to do like contactless delivery, but try and like scale it out to not just be left at your door. We're trying to do something that is more with we're trying to make it such that people can order from a shared device, and put them in office spaces, put them in hotels, dorms, college areas, just like a shared device that people can order from. Or if you're not, if you don't have an Uber account, if you're not an Uber user and you still want to order on Eats, there's a device that people can order off of. So we're kind of looking at the space of like shared computing and how that works, given the way that things are moving currently. And so that's kind of what we're working on now.
Great. This episode of Whiteboard.fm is brought to you by UI Sources. The problem with finding inspiration online is that there's too many hypothetical daily UI screenshots and not enough real apps. Well, not anymore. UI Sources is one of the biggest repositories of screenshots and interaction videos with thousands of examples of best practices in onboarding, gamification, payments, or whatever else you might be designing. You can also browse by industries like finance, entertainment, education, and so on. Stop reinventing the wheel, save product development time, find inspiration, and compare against the industry standard. Visit uisources.com and apply the coupon code WhiteboardFM for 10% off your subscription. That's uisources.com and just apply the code WhiteboardFM during checkout to get a 10% off your order. Alright, now back to the show. Can you also share more about your interview at Uber in terms of what kinds of questions were asked and
So my interview started with pretty similar to all my interviews. It started with a phone screen with a recruiter. They basically tell you about the role, make sure you're interested, and then it moved on to a really short portfolio review. It was about like a 45-minute portfolio review, where you present maybe 1 to 2 projects, and you kind of like talk it out at a higher level. And from there, it went to a video conference design challenge. So I had 3 interviews back to back. That was actually my final round, was 3 interviews back to back. They were all 30 minutes long. One of them was with the manager of my team, and it was more like a behavioral interview. And then the second one was a design challenge where I spoke to like one of the product designers on the team, and they gave me it was like a collaborative thing. So in that, I basically worked with him to solve a problem. And then the last interview was with a software engineer, and it was more of a, do you have just like technical understanding, or at least like some kind of idea of like how engineering and design kind of go together. And it was very high level, like not at all anything specific, but just to make sure that you can communicate with your engineers and like talk to them well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Shreya, you also said you've been a part of recruiting as well, right?
For Uber?
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
Okay. I was going to ask, what do you guys look for in designers?
Oh, like that. Okay. Yeah, I think something that is really important, I think I mentioned this before, but one of the things that the designers at Uber really care about is people making sure that the designers are showing their thought process, and they're showing the problem that they're trying to solve and who they're trying to solve it for. And also if they have intentionality behind their design. So we always ask like, why did you do this? Why did you do this? And like to get down to like the very core of why you made a certain decision. And then I think the last thing that people sometimes overlook, but it's really important, that I've also realized now, is making sure that your design interests match up with the interests of the company. Because a lot of times people will ask you like, why are you interested in working in a certain company? And maybe it's like a big name company or whatever, but if you don't have the same passion as like the company's mission, um, it's quite hard to keep that conversation going, and people can kind of tell. And so it's when you're, like practicing for interviews and stuff, like make sure you look at what the company's mission is and make sure you try and tie that into what your design goals are and what you're passionate about in design in general, because that will really help you. And it's really it really helps also specifically at Uber that everyone is so willing to work on all of these problems because they're actually really passionate about the mission of the company.
Awesome. So Shreya, what are your top 3 learnings from your experience at Uber, at Fractal? Like holistically, what are your top 3 learnings?
Um, so I think one of them, going off of what I said, I think one of them is learning what kind of designer I want to be. There are so many different types out there, and kind of learning what I really care about and what I want to work on the future. And so I started off with design kind of super broad and just designing all kinds of interfaces, and now I've kind of narrowed it into more of, okay, I want to design products that connect the physical space to the digital space, and that's like where my interests lie. um and so that wouldn't have happened unless I had been through this whole journey with Fractal, and then now with Uber, that I've realized that that's what I really like to do. I think that's one. The second is I've learned how to distance myself from my designs, which I think is really important, especially for a product like Uber, where you use it on a daily basis. At least I use it on a daily basis almost. I use Uber Eats almost every two times a week probably. And because you're also a user of the product, it's very easy to kind of confound your feelings towards the product and what all of your other users feel. And so something that I've repeatedly have to tell myself is, you are not your user. And that's something that's really important that I've kind of tried to do now. And so I've learned that through a lot of I've realized that like my intuitions or my kind of hypotheses are not probably the most accurate or correct, because it's biased by my feelings. And so it takes a really great designer and a really experienced designer to be able to completely distance themselves from the product and design it for like other people. And I think the third thing is to not be too attached to your designs. It's really hard when you walk into a critique and, like your work gets shot down by the rest of your team, or, you get asked these questions where you're like, oh, why did you do this? Why did you do this? But it's really important for you to realize that they're not critiquing you, they're critiquing your designs, and everyone's working towards the same mission in the end. So the idea is just that everyone is trying to just produce the best work possible. And so that was, I think, something else that I took away. And I think one more thing I want to add to that is that I realized that a lot of design is more than just what is at the surface level. So like sometimes you ask users for what their emotions are towards a product, and you ask them for what their emotions are towards a certain interface. And a lot of the times users will give you feedback, but they have a really hard time articulating what their emotional connection is to a product with the actual problem. So it's up to you to kind of make that connection and create that bridge to figure out what are you actually trying to solve for. And it often like shows up on the surface, and it doesn't actually give you an insight into what the real problem is. And so you kind of have to uncover what the
There are a lot of
resistance
layers.
is, and then like work to address that. So like really like trying to remove all the noise and figure out what the core issue is that your people are telling you is something that I've also learned. So kind of using like user feedback to inform, but not as like the like source of truth for your
Yeah,
designs.
that's quite insightful. What are some of the things that you're excited about right now in design?
I'm really excited to see where, especially considering everything that's going on, I'm kind of excited to see how that changes the landscape of design. I think now that everyone is so focused on tech and they're so dependent on technology to get their work done and to communicate, we've kind of realized how much it's like become interwoven in our lives, and so I'm wondering what new things are going to come up because of this, and kind of how um, how different products are kind of going to adjust and um, kind of like change to keep up with like what the new normal is now, I guess. I think that, and then I think something else that I'm excited for is to take design beyond the screen. I think right now people still think a lot about design as something that's purely like an interface that's digital, and I'm really excited to take it to where it is a part of like the framework of cities and the framework of how cities are built versus just being something that's digital and you kind of spend your whole time like in one window. So that's something that I really want to do in the future.
That's great. Also, what are some of the new things that you're learning?
um hmm So I think one of the biggest things that I'm learning, honestly, in like a more corporate environment is how to uh, present my designs in a way that is that everyone understands them. So you have to, when you present your designs, you have to present it differently to your business people. You have to present it differently to your engineers, and you have to present it differently to like your design group.
Yeah,
And so that's something that I'm learning, especially like how to communicate with engineers and how to like make sure you are you're creating things that are feasible to be built versus things that are just uh, look really nice and are not kind of, they're not the most efficient way to do something. That's something that I'm learning, and I think something else is just um, being able to be more open about sharing my work and asking questions. I think in within the workplace and just design as a whole, like the only way to improve, I feel, is to get feedback on your work, even if you're really scared to show it. And so I'm becoming better at kind of speaking up and asking for feedback, and looking for mentorship to help me get better. So it's more like skills on how to grow and improve, because it's always easy to kind of like get to a certain point and plateau and be like, oh, like I've made it here, so i'm I'm happy with where I am. But it's important to like look at what's coming and see how you can grow from here, because there's always like more experienced designers at the company who I like want to kind of learn from and grow into, hopefully, in the future. So that's definitely something that I'm trying to do.
nice. Also, Shreya, like you said, you're not from a design education background, right? So, when working with graduates from design schools, have you what are the differences that you've noticed, or if there's any gap?
Yeah, so I think there definitely is. One of my closest designers, or my closest coworkers, he went to design school for 4 years in undergrad, so we're on polar opposites. And the first thing that comes to my head is you definitely will feel a lot of imposter syndrome. You'll feel like you're not supposed to be there, or like, you know, you don't have the education required. And I've kind of realized that even if you do come from a design background, um, everyone is kind of just trying to, everyone is kind of figuring it out as you go. No one knows it better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And so it's really like a fake it till you make it kind of situation where everyone's kind of doing the same thing. But even more than that, I think one of the big things is that you have to find your strengths as a designer, and you have to stick to those. And it takes a while to like find what those strengths are, because obviously when you come from a non-design background, you're still trying to learn everything, so it's like a pretty far off even idea to just try and figure out what design is, let alone like finding what your strength is. But after a couple of years, you'll figure out what you like and what you don't like, and areas that you feel that you have more of an impact in. And so in that way, I think it's the same for everyone who has gone to design school or not. You'll have a strength and someone else will have a different strength. So like my coworker that I work the most with, his strength is more in like the visual space. He really likes like taking taking findings that are given to him and then translating them into a Figma file and making them high fidelity. And I'm someone who likes to start with a problem that's like completely unsolved, talk to a lot of people, synthesize the information, and like come up with the core ideas that or the core framework that we're trying to build. And so I realized that my strength is more in the first part of the design process, whereas his is in the second. And the idea is to just express that when you're talking and when you're working, and help and make people kind of understand that that's where you are, that's where your strengths are. And it's the same for everyone. Like even someone who has gone to design school, they learn the entire design process, but in the end, like they won't like the whole design process equally. They'll like parts of it and not other parts. Yeah. And so it kind of, then everyone's at the same playing field,
same level
at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, Shreya, do you think there is a difference in the number of male designers and the female designers in the industry? And if it is, what are your views on how it can be leveled?
I think there are, unfortunately. For a personal example, I have a team of 14, and there are currently 3 girls on the team. And it's sad that that's not uncommon in tech in general. And I think something that is, so I think one thing that's really important is to understand that designers can really come from anywhere, and broaden the scope of people that this field is exposed to. And it's really nice also to have people from different backgrounds at the table when you're talking about design. If you have someone who's like come from a psychology background, and someone who's come from engineering, and someone who's come from architecture, you get a lot more viewpoints, and it only makes the conversation richer and stronger than if you have people kind of all from the same field. I think that's one. And then I think two is it's really on the current women at the company to kind of take it on themselves to try and bring in more people. And obviously like support comes from everywhere, but if like younger people see that there are older women who are in design and in tech and are doing these jobs, it's kind of more attainable in their heads versus if they just hear about it. And so I've been trying to do as much as I can. If someone reaches out to me for like a portfolio review or to talk about design in general, I usually never say no. And so that's kind of like, I'm trying to help in my own way. But it's hard. I think it will require a lot of change from the industry as a whole. I think tech companies here are getting there. They're at least aware of it now, so they are trying to kind of be better, and they're doing more like recruiting events that are focused on like groups that are not as well represented. And so it's kind of more of like a push within the companies that they want it to happen. If it comes from internal, then it's more likely that it will happen because the employees will like somehow take action for it, or they'll do things. So it's kind of like, if your team or your company really is, it's like something that they care about, then that's why it's also important to find a place that matches with the values that you care about. I was lucky in the sense that like my team, even though it's like I'm one of 3 girls, I don't feel like I am being like, I don't feel like I'm being shut out or I can't talk. I'm still able to like share all my opinions, which is great. I think the harder thing for people our age is the years of experience in the room, and that's really something that I've been having to navigate. when do you feel comfortable talking when you're surrounded by people who have been at the company for like 5, 6, 7 years,
Yeah.
or have been in the industry for like 15, 20 years? You really feel like you have no say over them. And so that's kind of something that I've realized is more of an issue also. Like youngsters need to have a space to kind of open up and talk. And that's why it's also really important to find a mentor in the company that's like going to look out for you and kind of going to help you grow.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
So Shreya, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? Like, what is your vision?
That's a good question. So I think I really, as much as I love design, I love it right now. And I'm really, really happy that it's the field that I'm in now. I think I would want to transition to a smaller company just because I feel like at a smaller company, you have more room to kind of make foster impact without having to deal with like a lot of the formalities that you have to go through at a larger company. And I think I'm kind of more gearing towards I think my strengths lie in understanding the problem that a company is trying to solve or a product is trying to solve, and being able to empathize with users and kind of helping the product grow. And so I think I kind of want to transition more to a design lead role or a product manager role. Maybe not a product manager at a bigger company, but at a smaller company where I can still do design, but also kind of lead the product in a certain way.
Right.
And kind of identify what the problems are, because that's really left up to them. It's not something that design does often. And that's what I really like to do, is like identifying the problems. And so I would hope I could do something like that. I still want to be in the mobility space in some way. I don't know if that will be with Uber or somewhere else, but I'm hoping that I definitely want to be somewhere that is doing something in the physical space. I'm not someone who likes designing for companies where like everything's on the screen and the goal is to like keep you focused on the screen for like an X number of hours. I want to help people like get outside and like connect their lives in an easier way. And so I think I would be looking for something in that space with whatever comes up. Maybe it's self-driving. I don't know. Could be cool to work on that.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's a bit of a ways off before that
Hey, all
comes
the
up
power to you.
anywhere. But yeah, that's kind of where my head's at now. But really, it's kind of like everything's changing so fast. So
Yeah.
who knows like what technology will be open in 5 years or what's gonna come up, and maybe it'll be something exciting that I want to work
True.
on.
True.
Yeah.
Shreya, what advice would you give someone who wants to get started in design right now?
I think I would say three things. I would say one, read as much as you can about design. Read like articles. Medium is a great place to read a lot of articles by different designers. Read books. Obviously, like The Design of Everyday Things is like the designer's Bible. But don't feel like you have to get through all of it. It's just nice to be able to flip through. That's one. I think two would be talk to a lot of people. Don't be afraid to share your work and just ask for feedback, even if it's like, oh, hey, like I'm going to share it. Can I share my portfolio with you? And can you give me like 2 lines of feedback? Like even that will be useful for you. I think that is something that I would say. And then I guess the third thing is I would just say don't be scared to try new things, and don't be scared to take other people's work and kind of like try and either copy it or make it better. Don't use that as like the work that you present, but we're kind of in the phase where everything that exists comes from something that has already existed. And so being able to, by copying work, you'll be able to kind of like understand design principles and understand the visual aspects of like why they did certain things, and you'll just be able to get a hang of, you know, like what traditional or like accepted design practices are. And so just practice, get your skills to like figure out what is currently in the industry, the tools that are used, and make sure you can use those tools. But those aren't hard to pick up. It's more just like immerse yourself as much as you can in the design world and read
Right.
as much as you can, and just learn about what's currently going on and make sure you're on top of everything that's happening.
Yeah.
It's the advice that I have.
Yeah, that's great advice. Also, Shreya, what advice do you wish you had received when you were starting off?
Oh, um, I think one of the pieces of advice that I wish I had was I wish that I knew that everyone is kind of still trying to figure it out. That even people that like have jobs right now and are designers right now, they don't know everything, even though you like hold them at such a high pedestal. I think that's something that I'd wish I'd known. And I another piece of advice I think I would have wanted to have the advice of, you know, it's okay to like have your first pieces of work be not good, or like basically the advice that I got later was like someone once told me that your first idea is like almost always going to suck, and it's okay to go with that. And when you're so stuck in like trying to make your first idea perfect and make it the best idea, that's never going to be true. And so you only kind of you only pull out the best solutions as you iterate further and further, and design is never really done. So you always have to kind of you always keep working on it. So it's never like you're at the best possible solution, and sometimes you just have to just be comfortable with the fact that like your first idea is never going to be good, which is something that I wasn't comfortable with, and I wish I had known that that's something that is okay to have. Yeah.
Great. That's the end of our interview, Shreya. Thanks a lot for being a part of it. It's been great knowing your story,
Of
and
course.
wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for doing this. I truly wish I had this when I was recruiting or when I was getting into design. I think it'll be so helpful for all the kids that are starting off recruiting and getting into design and everything. So it's a big thing that you're doing. Everyone will appreciate it. So thank you as well.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and I hope you liked it. To check out other episodes and clips from the interview, subscribe to the Whiteboard.fm YouTube channel. Feel free to share your favorite parts of the interview, and don't forget to tag us. This podcast is a part of the 10K Designers Network. You can check out other projects on 10kdesigners.com.